what branch of government is Article 3? Y'all know it. Call it out. Just call it out.
Judicial.
Judicial, correct. Okay. So the judicial in the United States, according to Article 3, Section 1, you can read it right here, the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain. If the Congress can create them, what else could it do? Take them apart, take them down. So maybe when we have some of these people with decisions running away with our culture, maybe we should give the Congress the backbone to, first of all, read this, and second of all, do something about it. They created those courts. They can change them. They can dissolve them. Okay, the judges, both of the Supreme and the inferior courts, shall hold their offices during, what are the next two words?
Good behavior.
Louder?
Good behavior.
Good behavior. It does not say life. It doesn't say that if they've gone daft, we have to keep letting them offer their opinions on cases. During good behavior, okay. And shall at stated times receive for their services a compensation which shall not be diminished during their continuance in office. Yes?
Does Judge Ginsburg, who called Lindsey Graham a woman, count as bad behavior?
If he does what?
She called Lindsey Graham a woman, thinking that he actually was. Does that count as something that would get her out?
Okay, I'm not in a position to judge this, but there are some interesting questions. Yes?
Who decides what good behavior is?
At the time the Constitution was written, I think everybody would have understood. Nowadays, there would be some questioning and redefining. But of course, in any judicial opinions, it's very common for them to look back to prior opinions. But there seems to be a rule, whether written or unwritten, that they don't go back to decisions before 1938, which is a very bad situation, because you'll find that based on what you've learned here, what you know, what your parents believe, whatever, that most of the Supreme Court decisions, with rare exceptions where the court actually overturned itself later, such as the Dred Scott case. There, under one Chief Justice, it was ruled a certain way, and subsequently that was overturned. Other than that, the justices for many, many years, decades, were apparently more conscientious, but at some point the Supreme Court became basically packed with socialists. And from then on, the individual tended to lose, or certainly the conservative, the traditionalist, or whatever, as socialist types took over. And there's whole other courses could be given on that. How the Fabian socialists, named for General Fabius, and he had this amazing technique for not getting his people killed. He was simply showing up late for the battles. So the other generals would come and duke it out with whatever the enemy was, and then as they were either about to be defeated or whatever, he'd come in with fresh troops and either carry the day or be there in time to walk back with a victory. But anyway, so Fabian socialists are the people who don't believe in violent revolution to overthrow a government. They would rather just change it gradually. And of course, to change something peacefully, they've decided early on, about 1895 or so, they were over here deciding to take over the schools. And as you know, the public schools have succumb to that, and then some. Anyway, I digress. Minutes ago from Mr. Tregenza, I got a marvelous book which gives further insight on some of this stuff, and I think we should probably move on to that. But you had a question, Camel?
Yeah, I was wondering, just for example, like using the word behavior, would you go to a law dictionary such as Black's or BJ's, and would you take the definition from that?
I would certainly start there. And there's a number of them besides Black's. There's, anyway, several others, and there's commentaries and
Can I
Black's.
recommend one? The Noah Webster 1828, which you can get online.
I have that.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much research that can be done on this stuff, and so much fun you can have showing up knowing more than your representatives or senators in many cases. Is it important, or gives?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So good behavior. Let's say the judge makes some sort of a felony, yet for some reason it's still considered good behavior.
Sir, could you either
Let's
stand and
say-
come forward or something?
Let's say due to our terrible standards, the judge is committing a felony, yet it's still considered good behavior. Is that possible?
That would be a problem. Well, there are many people who have believed that some of the relatively recent executives have committed grave crimes. There's plenty of stuff out on the YouTubes, strange case of Vince Foster and other things that would lead you to believe that under the present circumstances, they may not be removed. But we need to turn that around. And we need to examine more things. It's funny because as long as the Democrats were in power, the last word they wanted to hear was impeachment. And my goodness, I think they were talking about it 2 days after the election, let alone after inauguration. But as Dr. Long brought up on his computer the other day, there's a little poster in there, and it says something like, the Democrats have never been so angry with the Republicans as they are now since we took away their slaves. I probably blew it a little. I'm sure it's more succinctly stated there, but you get the idea.
That works.
Let's see, gotta find my place again here. Okay, section 2, the judicial power, so we're at the top of page 13. The judicial powers shall extend to all cases in law and equity, equity being fairness, so in other words, maybe the more money issues or whatever, arising under this Constitution, the laws of the United States and treaties made or which shall be made under their authority. That's one category, and you can see that by the semicolon. Then we go on to all cases affecting ambassadors, other public ministers, and consuls. Another semicolon. So you get that. It's kind of top employees. To all cases of admiralty and maritime jurisdiction. Another semicolon, and a very interesting note in this book that Mr. Tregenza handed me a few minutes ago. Let's see if I can pull that up quickly. Oops. I had it here a second ago. The trouble is, when I get something to read, I tend to read on and lose my place. Well, anyway, the point of maritime or admiralty jurisdiction is it relates to things that happen. Thank you, Georgia and Mr. Kellis. Maritime and anyway, that these things relate to things on the high seas, and things happening on the high seas are in many ways different, but to a great extent, and this is a book from Mountain Press in Indiana, which is an oxymoron, but anyway, but it's a great, appears to be a great book, and they say they're pointing out that many of the rules and habits and so on that the courts of this country have taken on were actually originally dealing particularly with maritime commercial cases, and they treat us like corporations and so on. But anyway, all of that is for your further research. I just bring it up because I found an expert that agrees with all the kooks in my county who are saying this kind of thing. And by the way, I'm not running those people down. They're doing their research. Okay, to controversies to which the United States shall be a party, to controversies between two or more states, and then there's one that it's in brackets because that's been superseded by the 11th Amendment, between citizens of different states, between citizens of the same state claiming lands under grants of different states, and then here's another part that's been whipped out. So anyway, that's to give you the idea of the various cases where they have the original jurisdiction. Where they have jurisdiction. In all cases affecting ambassadors, other public ministers, and consuls, and those in which a state shall be a party, the Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction. In other words, the first time that case comes up, it goes to the Supreme Court. Sometimes it might be like if an ambassador is murdered on federal land or something, bingo, that's Supreme Court right off the bat. They don't go into the nearest county. In all other cases, and this is important now, we're in the middle of the second paragraph of section 2. In all the other cases before mentioned, the Supreme Court shall have appellate jurisdiction both as to law and fact, with such exceptions and under such regulations as the Congress shall make. So we've seen Madison versus Marbury saying that the Supreme Court shall decide the constitutionality of something passed by the Congress, but here we're saying there's a check and balance, and that the Congress has oversight over the Supreme Court. So what do you suppose might have happened if the Congress had been aware of this and acted upon it in 1973 when Roe v. Wade came up? Andrew?
Abortion might not be legal.
Exactly. And it certainly would not have been taken from one specific kind of case in Texas involving, I believe, a welfare mother and whether or not the state could encourage her or direct her to ending the life of her child, or whether they should pay for it. But anyway, so based on that one case, what was declared by the media following the Supreme Court decision? That abortion was the law of the land, yeah, every state, regardless of their laws. And there were places where it was legal. So, you know, if somebody had a serious reason for getting it done, they probably could have made arrangements. Nowadays, they'd use GoFundMe. In the old days, they'd put a jar at the local bank and people could make a contribution if they wanted to send somebody on a trip for a purpose like that. Anyway, it's just extremely important. And I have been at public meetings with 1,000 people in attendance and a congressman, former congressman in this case, as a speaker. He was running for governor of the state. And I brought this up in the presence of that audience. They recognized the value of it. And this man said he didn't know anything about it, but he would check with his staff. He didn't get elected, by the way. They didn't vote for this character for governor. And he had been a very popular, because he was a nice guy. But nice guys can be bad too. That's probably among the most important things in this section. And I guess I have about 3 minutes to carry on here for section 3. You see where that starts, bottom of 13 or near. Treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. No person shall be convicted of treason unless on the testimony of 2 witnesses to the same overt act, or on confession in open court. That term, open court, is important. Courts are kind of traditionally open here, but there's a lot of restrictions. They don't want you taking a camera in. They may steal your cell phone if you bring it in because it might contain a camera, or it might ring and irritate the judge or whatever. But open court is where it is open to the public. So they can't have somebody still black and blue from the torture and eyelids drooping and, blood running down his head, and then say, okay, how do you plead? And he says, guilty. That shouldn't pass muster. Not saying that it won't one of these days, if we don't prevail soon. Anyway, there's a little more there about Congress having the power to declare the punishment of treason, but no attainder of treason shall work corruption of blood. Now that's an interesting thing, but it was in certain European countries and at certain times possible that someone was convicted of a crime, and then basically their children were, disinherited or regarded as criminal or whatever on to the, further generations. So they didn't want any part of that stuff going on here. So the neither the attainder or the forfeiture would occur except during the lifetime of the person who was the accused. Any remaining question? Yes.
Okay, President appoints the judge. Who can remove the judge?
Who can remove?
Yeah.
I presume he would be impeached, and in cases where he's impeached, it's somebody different, I believe, who, oh no, is it the?
Is it Congress? Congress.
Okay, so the House of Representatives impeaches him, and normally the Senate would try him, but isn't his different, or is it the President that's different? It's the President, and then the Supreme Court Chief Justice presides. That's the one. Sorry, I was mixed up. Okay, so he would have to, or whichever justice was accused by the House of Representatives would have to stand trial in the Senate.
What if it was the Chief Justice that was accused? Who was on that?
I believe that would still be, that the trial would be conducted in the Senate. However, zero time. Just one last thing. They've been dodging this whole question lately with special prosecutors. So I'll just back out of it and say keep investigating, keep reading, keep thinking, keep those brain cells active, and we'll turn this around.